Hola, bona tarda a tothom.
So hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this third session and the second day of this conference on colonialism organized by Democratic Memory, the European Observatory of Memories, and from the Born Centre Cultural. First of all, we would like to introduce the first roundtable of today's afternoon. But first of all, I would like to take advantage of this moment to thank the democratic memory representation of the municipality and the European Observatory of Memories and also the Born Centre Cultural for having given us the opportunity to organize together with Ricard Conesa this seminar, which I can say have been a very encouraging challenge because of the content and also because of the challenge to be able to adapt to this context that we are living as a society. I would also like to take advantage of this moment to thank the different participants and the attendees for having been able to readapt to this digital format. This is not easy, and of course, I think and I trust that soon we will slowly recover the normality that we have left behind for many months. And in the future, we can continue with these debates, which are so interesting and so needed, and to be able to do it on site. Today, we will listen to two different sessions on this colonialism conference, and both of them will deal from two different perspectives, the question of colonialism in the past and also the question of colonialism and the heritage of colonialism in the present. In this specific roundtable that we are starting now, and we have three different speakers, Alberto Lopez Vargados, Verónica Peña Filiu, and Norma Véliz. In this session, the idea is to deal with what we have called, and the title of this roundtable, invisible colonialism. And I think that we have to explain this concept and we have to justify the existence of this panel. The way we understand this invisible colonialism is the absence or marginality in the narration of some colonial experiences. And this is like this because in general, when we speak about colonialism or when we try to explain colonialism, which has specific consequences on the Spanish or Catalan question, we usually talk about the colonialism and the American experience and the devastating effects they had on this territory. But often within this narration, we forget other territories and other transnational experiences which are happening now today in our city. And basically, this will be the justification for this panel discussion. For this reason, what we wanted to deal with is several questions. On the one hand, colonialism in Africa and the African colonial memory, also the colonial experiences in the Philippines and the Marianas Islands, which are the interventions which will be given by Alberto Lopez Vargados and Verónica Peña Filiu. And we thought it was very necessary to include these points of view and perspectives because these are territories that also suffer and had been affected by the colonial question, but they have often been excluded from the general knowledge about the dynamics and the functioning and the roots of the Spanish and Catalan colonialism. And we think that one way of breaking these absences and this lack of visibility was to include a session during which we could deal with these questions, which are very relevant. On the other hand, we also thought that it was pertinent to establish a dialogue and an exchange within these talks, which are also based on academic research within the world of activism. And one activism that has to be recognized is promoting this research, and it places us in front of an uncomfortable mirror as a society and that we think we have to approach. And this is why we have this third participation, which will try to deal with the consequences of our country and North America of these colonial regimes, such as the questions of symbolic violence or racism that as a society we suffer. This is necessary because we have taken on often that these dynamics of colonialism have some effects that have to repair those territories which were colonized. But our society lives outside this heritage, and we think this should not be like this. And this is why we wanted to include this intervention within the concept of forgotten memory or invisible memory. Having done this introduction on the round table, and I don't want to dwell on the introduction, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, who will be Alberto Lopez Vargados. Let me introduce him. Alberto is a doctor in anthropology and professor of the University of Barcelona. He's specialized in the region of the Maghreb and with community dynamics of Islam in Europe, and also practices of Islamophobia that are developed in these territories. And recently, he has centered most of his research in following the colonial imprint of Catalonia and Spain in the African continent. And also, he also had as a protagonist the region of Ifni, and the subject of debate was the Catalan military service during 1957. Those exhibitions were open at the Museum of Cultures of the World, and they allow us to socialize this memory, which is very much unknown in the colonial past. So without further ado, I give the floor now to Alberto Lopez. Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. My apologies for my voice. I have a cold and my voice is a bit shaky, but I hope you can follow me and understand me. What I will have to do is to thank and express my gratitude. Also, as Celeste has said, the representatives of the municipality, the Observatory of Memories, and the Born Center of Memory, and especially to Celeste and Ricard as organizers of this 3-day conference, which obviously I think is necessary, and it's very nice and also needed that we have continuity in the future. I would like to adjust to the time that has been given to me because I always speak a bit longer. I will try to read. It won't be very spontaneous, but I will adjust to the time, and I'm sure you will be thankful for this. Okay. The Black Lives moment in Barcelona last summer, and this is when it exploded in the city. It is obvious that on the question of colonial memory, and more specifically on the African memorial colony and the Spanish experience in Africa, is very much recognized. It is also true that the colonial fact in Africa and America conceals a certain interest and enjoys visibility, which means that several years ago it was impossible to think about this. And I think that it has substantially changed the perception of this memory. And without being too optimistic, I think it has stopped being a taboo, something nobody was talking about. People are starting to talk about it. Modestly, I have contributed to this, but many people are contributing to speaking about this past, and this past, which is almost immediate, is now on the table and we can discuss it. But all this visibility, which has been present now, is acritical. I mean that it expressed mainly in practice through a process of patrimonial evaluation, so through the mechanisms of value creation, which are characteristics of the neoliberal capitalism. So the colonial footprint is the way it reaches the citizens. Some examples surrounding us are the following. For example, beer can be called Manila. Brand of beer can be named Manila. A hotel, in this case 1898, can be proud of being the old headquarters of the Philippines and to have rooms colonial style. They have rooms of a colonial style, or maybe to be out of the metropolitan area of Barcelona. We can also claim the fortunes acquired through the slaves traffic towards the Caribbean through a fair of Indians, such as the one that is organized in Bagur, but also highlighting the Indian patrimony all through the Catalan coast. Someone could think maybe that all this is a popular approach, an inform of the colonial experience, even vulgar, we can dare to say. The question is that often, and I can say it firsthand, and I'm going to give you an example of this, the doctoral, erudite, academic approach is not necessarily the best. And let me give you a specific example, which is almost a personal example because it was a first-hand experience. Not many years ago, I had the privilege to be part of a commission created ad hoc in order to evaluate a reform of the Ethnological Museum of Barcelona, which belongs to the municipality of Barcelona. And that commission counted on the presence of many university representatives related to anthropology, such as myself. And within this commission, several university colleagues, such as myself, deny, for example, that this museum, the Ethnological Museum of Barcelona, suffer the original sin of other museums, such as the one of Brazil, of Brussels or Paris, or the British Museum of London, to give you three specific examples. They had a wide patrimony related to the colonial experience, heritage, which was claimed by these doctors. My colleagues say that this original sin was not suffered by the Ethnographic Museum of Barcelona. And in order to show me the innocence of the institution, reminded me that all the collections were bought, as if the hierarchical relations and the pressure of the colonial system didn't make these organized expeditions of the museum towards the colonies, in this case towards Guinea, were not an example of domination. And of course, they were done under circumstances that the ones selling did not have a lot of maneuver in order to decide the price of the pieces acquired by the representatives of the museum. In my opinion, very briefly, what I would like to say on the time I have left, try to talk about the main reasons that, in my opinion, explain this ellipsis. And I think that this is what it should be called, ellipsis. Why can we say and can we see this fracture? The idea of a colonial fracture is something already introduced by Pascal Blanchard, several authors who have been working on the question of the French colonial memory in France, and they introduce basically that the colonial experience, it's an experience forgotten not only in the identity of the old metropolis, but even this experience is seen as accidental, as a contingent, as if it were something not determining and not influencing from a structural point of view in the identity construction of the colony, as if the experience along the 20th century could be built independent from everything that happened in the colonies. This idea of colonial fracture, I think, can be extrapolated to the French case and the Spanish case and the Catalan case, and the one of Barcelona, which is the one we are dealing with. I will try to approach in a clear way a couple of reasons very quickly. And the first one, I will say, that can be applied to the whole of the Spanish state. The second one is more specific. And of course, I will try to dwell on both of them. The first reason is what could be called the amnesty of Frankism and their projects. We have to say that this amnesty and amnesia have a shared etymology, and this is not by any chance. This forgiveness and the way we forgot due to the law of 1977, affecting not only the crimes committed by the Franco regime, but also the political projects developed by this regime or taken on by the Franco state, among them the colonial African adventure. Only then, in my opinion, can we explain the case of Western Sahara, which is now something we often talk about because 20 years of the ceasefire between both parties, Morocco and Sahara, they have gone back to fighting. The feeling that the different democratic governments of the Spanish state came from the Constitution of 1978 without any responsibility on the future of the subjects of colony, which de facto continues to be not decolonized. It has not been recognized yet by international entities, can only be interpreted through this feeling of trying to forget about this responsibility. So everything is under the carpet of a self-compliant narration about transition, which is and has been just pure propaganda, like an official memory or good memory, as Ricard Viñas says, making us self-managing private memories. A country where we have not supported and are not, it's not supporting with some exception, the specific private memories related to these expeditions, and therefore they are obliged to deploy and to develop and to become visible in a sui generis way through a process of self-management without the academic arguments or scientific arguments that the state and the administrations can contribute with in order to collaborate and strengthen these memories. We belong to a country where the colonial memory is almost completely private. In my opinion, this ellipse has been created by the feeling that we have broken all the political, symbolical, and responsibility barriers and obstacles with the Franco regime. An interested image and perspective which we should leave behind. And in second case, and this is the second reason, and I will close with this, and I hope I'm adjusting to the time that has been given to me, what we could call the solipsistic myth of conservative Catalanism. This term was coined during the 19th century, and this myth, which was hegemonic for more than 20 years of pugilism, and I will say that has been translated without many change to the present process since 2012. This myth says that the colonial project in Africa was an affair of the state, exclusively an affair of the Spanish state, in which the Catalan elites and, of course, the rest of the Catalan people intervene without wanting to intervene. So any responsibility is in the hands of the state and not the peoples and societies belonging to this state, for better or worse. This argument and this idea that the Catalan society as such did not participate in the colonial project and it was just forced by the circumstances, we have seen in a very clear way when we organized the exhibition on Kunde and Guinea, which is obvious that we see the role of the Catalan bourgeoisie, which was fundamental for the development of the colony from an economic perspective. But also in Tabue, we have seen it in the case of yesterday, and we could see this in the case of Morocco and more nuisance because they ended up being a military territory in the Sahara. It could also be seen in the Sahara. What we see in summary are two mechanisms of building the memory which have favored the notion of responsibility to this immediate past. One, it affects the totality of the transition, and the other one, which is a specific Catalanist project, which has been around this country for many years, and which allowing us, and this is particular on the Spanish army and the Catalan society that was there just by chance. Well, in my opinion, the first thing we have to do in order to overcome this ellipsis and this rupture, and this is what I wanted to say with my talk, is to highlight and to place on the table and to talk about these two arguments and to start rethinking them and to talk about responsibility on this immediate past. And of course, we do have a certain responsibility. And that's all. Thank you very much. I think this is 20 minutes. Thank you very much for listening to me. Don't worry, Alberto. Perfect. 20 minutes. And thank you very much for your introduction. It's been very interesting, and I'm sure that later during the debate we can recover some of these questions. This relationship between the law of amnesty and colonial presence has stirred many questions. Let's listen now to Verónica Peña Filiu. Let me introduce Verónica, who is a doctor in history by the Pompeu Fabra University, associated professor in the Master of Asia and Pacific of the same university. Her line of research has been on colonialism and also the history of the function of how feeding is important in intercultural research. Verónica has also done research in Mexico and one where she has combined this, and she participates in Empire's Metropolis and the group Colonialism, Gender and Materiality. Verónica, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Celeste. Let me see if I can share my PowerPoint, because I'm not good at technology. You have the option of sharing your screen. Okay. Now we can see it. Thank you very much, Verónica. Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude also to the organizers of the conference for having had this such an interesting initiative and so needed. And I would like also to express my gratitude to all the institutions involved in the organization of these conferences. And especially, I would like to thank Celeste and Ricard for having invited me to participate in this table. Within these conferences, I would like to talk about the Pacific, a region of the world that, although it has a past which is extremely related to Spanish colonialism and also to Catalonia and the history of Catalonia, is one of the regions in which we think less when we refer to the modern and contemporary colonialism. And I would also like to talk about the specific territory, which are the Marianas Islands, which is an archipelago that for more than 300 years, 1665 to 1898, was part of the colonial territories of the Spanish Empire. And now the footprint and the memory of that period, the colonial period, is still very much alive. And this is a situation that no doubt contrast, as I was saying before, with the absence of knowledge and reference points that now we have on the Pacific, and more specifically on the Marianas. In fact, with the title Forgotten Memories, Life Memories, I would like to talk about this amnesia which currently exists in our society, an absence and amnesia that contrasts with many of the tangible and intangible elements of the Spanish colonial past present in the Marianas, which go from the riverbanks, gastronomy, and religion. I would like to dedicate this presentation and to reflect on the possible reasons which explain this material colonial past that exists between one society and the other. And with this objective, first of all, I would like to make a very brief balance of the way Spanish history has dealt with the Marianas Islands. And I think that the different historical narrations that have been built have already conditioned, or at least have contributed to widen and deepen on the knowledge that we have on the territory. And at the same time, I would like to introduce very briefly the footprint of colonialism in the islands and at the same time trying to indicate how this past is experimented in the present, especially how it is surviving in the public space. And finally, I would like to mention and to explain very briefly an archaeological project which is coordinated by the Pompeu Fabra University, with whom I was lucky enough to participate, and they remember this need to talk about this oblivion in Catalonia and Spain on the Marianas Islands. Let's start by the beginning. And in order to answer one of the questions, I hope this is not the case, but unfortunately, this is the typical question asked by all the people working on the Marianas, and people are asking, where are the Marianas? Many people don't even know where they are, and I include myself, because before studying the Marianas, I didn't know about this territory, unfortunately. On many occasions, people who work on the territory were obliged to answer this first question. As you can see in the map, the Marianas are 4 by 15 islands in Western Pacific, 2,500 kilometers away from the Philippines. And it's very important to highlight that the Marianas now are divided into administrative units. One, on the one hand, which is the biggest island of the Marianas, and nowadays is a territory incorporated to the US. And then we have the rest of the Marianas, which are the north of Marianas, which are forming the Commonwealth of these islands, which is also under the influence of the US. And this is the situation, and is related to the colonial history of the Marianas. Since the islands were incorporated into the possessions of the Spanish Empire, different powers, among them Germany, the US, and Japan, have taken control of the territory, leaving a profound footprint in different aspects, such as language, administration, culture, and the situation of the islands facing global conflicts. Remember that 3 summers ago, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was 3 summers ago, Guam was immersed in the escalate of tensions between North Korea and the US. In fact, we could say, and we could still say, that Guam is still under colonial imperialism, under the process of decolonization of the UN, to which Alberto was referring before. This is an organism which is in charge of promoting this process of decolonization of the territories, which is still under the administration of colonial powers. Well, according to this committee, this is a non-autonomous island, which is under the process of decolonization. However, during this recent period, the islands have been marked by the colonial domination, and we have to take into account that this has been preceded by many years of occupation in the islands. Although the islands are separated in administrative units, we have to take into account that the whole of the islands share a common culture, and they are the origin of the Chamorros, which is the name of the native inhabitants of the Marianas Islands. Why do we know, why do we have so few references of the Marianas in our society? Personally, I think that the way we dealt with the territory from the academic perspective has difficulted this territory. In fact, I think that the way they have approached some of these factors have contributed to a certain lack of interest for the islands, and it has created some narratives which are not related to the reality of the colonial past. I wouldn't want to invalidate completely all these contributions, because as you know, historical knowledge evolves through time, and it's conditioned by the context of this knowledge. But it is true that these contributions show us the need to be close to this colonial approach from other objectives, trying to find the complexity inherent to this period.
More specifically, when I started the research, the PhD research on the Marianas Islands, I was quite surprised, first of all, by the little interest in the islands, because the literature does not refer to the islands, and also the ideas that somehow are limited regarding the Spanish colonial period. In many of the works, the Marianas are described as a minor islands that occupy a marginal position in the Asia Pacific colonial pathways compared to the Philippines, which were considered much more interesting due to their role in the trade routes of the modern age. So this image of the Marianas was deeply surprising for me. So as I get acquainted with more written documents and the maps, I realized that the Marianas, more specifically in the modern maps, were also considered like a hot spot in the maps, and the islands and its inhabitants were described in the literature, oftentimes in the diaries of the expeditions, of the colonial expeditions in the Pacific Islands. In a manuscript, the first manuscript that gathers European descriptions of Asian societies and Pacific societies. The document is called the Boxer Codex. The Chamorros is the first ethnic group to be described. And here you can see in this picture an image of the codex of the manuscript where the locals are represented and the exchanges between the Chamorros and the colonizers. Here you can see another image in this piece. There is a representation of the ethnic groups by partners, so men and women, and then there's a short description of their theaters. It's a very interesting document. Nonetheless, and besides all this literature, it's also true, and in my PhD I insist on that, as we evolved in the modern age, well, a very specific image of the Marianas was mainstreamed. It was considered, the islands were considered as a poor territory with no natural resources. Here is an image of López de Velasco, where he reflects this European perception on the Marianas Islands. And this idea was mainstreamed, was expanded over the next centuries, over the following centuries. And I believe that history has somehow incorporated this first wrong idea. There was a clear lack of interest for the islands, as if they were totally unimportant. And another element that was quite striking for me when I get acquainted with this document is that many of the approaches presented the 300 years of colonial history as a uniform era in which nothing happened. And the only stage that seemed to be a little bit more important was the first 40 years of colonization of the islands when the conflict between the local population and the colons arise. But once the colonial ruling was imposed, it seems like nothing happened in the Marianas Islands. The Chamorros had become Catholics and they had converted into Catholicism and nothing else had to be explained. And that was quite striking to me. All this lack of visibility of the Marianas Islands in history, also in our public space, is in deep contrast with the visibility of the Spanish colonialism in the Marianas Island today. As you can see in this picture was taken by Dr. Sandra Munto, reflects how only when you land at Wang's airport, there are several Hispanic references that makes us think about the colonial era. As you can see in this picture, There's this word in English, baggage claim, customs, restrooms, but also in the local language, in the Chamorro, and you can see the influence of Spanish in the Chamorro language. And as you can see here, the vestige of colonialism, of Spanish colonialism, are very present in the islands. In the first walk through Wang, you can find military institutes and facilities as well as names of the streets, such as Hernán Cortés, with this very clear footprint of the Spanish colonialism. That means that the colonial heritage survives. It has survived, depending, of course, on the perspective that you take, but it's still present. Also, Catholicism, the religion was introduced, of course, violently, and it's a religion of 90% of the Chamorro population, and Catholic prevalence is quite important. In the 20th century, after the colonial Spanish period, the missioners also propagated Catholicism in the islands. In 1911, Rome created a delegation in Wang, and it was, by the way, led by a Catalan, Francesc Xavier Vila y Mateu, who had been born in Arenys de Mar in Catalonia. And these priests, these Catalan priests, replaced the pioneers of the island. I mean, those that had been sent to the islands in first place. Now, regarding other references to Catholicism, as we can see here, we can find all over the place statues and monuments commemorating the Spanish colonial period, and more specifically the arrival of the Catholic religion. You can see here two monuments to pay tribute to the Jesuit San Vitores priest, the first Jesuit missioner who led the first permanent mission in Wang, in the Marianas Island, until the mission. Before the mission, the islands had been under colonial rule, but they had not been efficiently colonized. It was only after the arrival of the missioner that it was considered that the islands were deeply deeply colonized. The public space, Wang's public space, also includes monuments of Chamorro's heroes. Here we can see in the slide Kipuja. Kipuja, according to the literature, was the first Chamorro to be baptized. He was a local leader, and he allowed Jesuitic missioners to expand Catholicism throughout the territory. Many of these elements that were inherited from the have been incorporated in the Chamorro island culture in a very singular process, and today they are considered part of the traditional Chamorro culture, together with religion, which is another heritage that shows this interminglement, one would say, between these two elements. Of course, gastronomy, that is. In this slide, you can see a recipe dating back from the mid 20th century, and amongst the recipes, of course, only the name of the recipe is quite familiar for us Spaniards. Perhaps the ingredients change, but the idea is very much Spanish. So it's clear that there is another area where the Spanish colonialism deeply rooted. Cooking. This is a traditional dish that includes many of the Hispanic traditional recipes, and this presence of the Hispanic food has a deep relationship with the way the Marianas were colonized. They were colonized from the Philippines and New Spain, from Mexico, at the times when Asians and Americans had incorporated many gastronomic traditions from the colony, from Spain, and many of these traditions adapted to the local practices by developing this very interesting gastronomy today in the islands, even if it has, of course, evolved in the last few years during the last half of the 20th century. It's also important to underline that in Wang's public space, many colonial elements coexist with the historic moment previous to the arrival of the invaders. That is called the latte period. Here we can see a picture of the latte columns. These are some stone columns on which they would build homes and buildings with different functions in the pre-colonial society, and that were used until the end of the colonial period, actually. The interest that this era provoked, this latter period, this period previous to colonialism, has overcome the academic sector. It's considered the last Chamorro period, and it's had a key role in the development of the Chamorro modern identity. And actually, the latte stones are today a symbol of the non-colonial heritage, and they are present all around the island. Now, to conclude, I would like to say that the need to develop alternative historic narratives that try to get closer to the Marianas pre-colonial period from a non-Eurocentric perspective, that is, without paying tribute to colonialism, has brought many researchers to develop alternative research on the region, on the islands, and that's how today in Universitat Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona there's a research group, the SEGIM, that is focused on the study of the Marianas from this perspective by paying attention to the materiality and trying to rediscover the traditional narrative to understand the colonial era in all its complexity. One of the most important initiatives that this research group is leading is the archaeological excavations all around the islands. In this slide, you can see the spot where we have been working in the last few years is the former colonial church, San Dionisio Church. Here's an image of the bay, and, well, it is said that this is the place where the first contact between the colonialists and the Chamorros took place. In the framework of a research project called Averigua, we aim at understanding the identity, permanence, and change processes related to the inclusion of the Marianas to the Spanish Empire, and our aim is to understand the impact that colonialism had on the islands and the incorporation of the islands into the Spanish Empire had for the local traditions. The fact that we carry out excavations in this Dumata church, well, the decision was taken by the Dumatark community, the local inhabitants took this decision, and, well, we responded to their demand, and that's why we started the excavation in this area. And during all the different campaigns that we have carried out, excavations have always been, let's say, well, we've always taken into account the needs of the local population, and we want to, of course, give the church back. So the desire to somehow overcome the lack of interest that the Marianas Island have today, well, there are different members of the team that are trying to develop community museums in the island and to celebrate exhibitions that aim at presenting the territory from a different perspective, not from an imperial perspective, and by underlining the most important figures in the discovery of the Pacific. The aim is to explain the impact that colonialism had on local traditions, on the Marianas Islands, and especially in the material perspective of the islands. And that would be it from my side. This is my last slide, and I would now say that that's it from my side. Thank you very much, and I will be very happy to answer to all your questions. Thank you very much, Veronica. It's been a very interesting presentation. I really didn't know much about the Marianas and the Pacific, and I believe it's a very interesting topic. Africa is already not very well known, and the situation is even more dramatic when it comes to the Pacific region. Now we're gonna hand it over to the third speaker. You will have to unshare your screen. My apologies, of course. Now, the third presentation will be by Norma Véliz Torresano. She's from Ecuador. She's been living in Catalonia for 8 years, and she's a well-acknowledged activist in the area of the care economy. She works in the organization Mujeres Palante, a project accompanying migrant women who work in Catalonia, and she's also helping in the development of a project called Mujeres Unidas Entre Tierras, Women United in different parts of the world. And this project aims at facilitating support to women working in the cleaning sector. Hello and good afternoon, one and all. Unfortunately, I don't work in Mujeres Palante anymore. I am now working in another sector. I work in a cooperative. I work in the promotion of cooperativism in Catalonia. A year ago, December last year, I started working in this new project, and now I support the project Mujeres Unidas Entre Tierras, which is a cooperative of women, cleaners and care workers. I would like to thank the organizers and those who have allowed me to take part in this session. I would like to thank the organizers for the effort of integrating a foreigner person like myself. Thank you very much for integrating me. My presentation is a reflection and a proposal on how to integrate the voice of migrant women, housekeepers, and workers in the care sector. First of all, I would like to ask and invite you all to think about memory and to think about history. And what is it that we are doing to build this memory? Because of course it's important to pose ourselves such questions in order to understand to what extent we are today acting as colonized beings. As Celeste said at the beginning of this presentation, colonialism can sometimes be invisible. And I believe that my presentation has to do with this invisible colonialism that is taking place here and now in Catalonia and also in other parts of Spain. I believe it is important to incorporate the voice of migrants, activists, and we need to also bring on board the strength, the struggles of migrants in order to have a more holistic definition of history. I don't like that many people have been left behind, also racialized people
que
that
son
has been
personas
born in
que
Catalonia
portan
or in Spain. These people
Ange y
have
Pange
been here
distin
for
aquí
ages,
a
actually.
la comunidad
They have lived in the community for
y se
ages,
las
and
trata com
they are treated as
com si fossin encara persones migrants. I
migrants.
també com se deixa
And
de lado
also,
la
oftentimes,
veu
the
i el
voice
discurs
of
de les persones migrants
the voice and the narrative of
que estem
migrants is
construint un
disregarded,
país des de
as
la base.
migrants are contributing to building up the
Per
country
això,
from the
els
roots.
col·lectius migrants
That's why
fem una
migrants
interpel·lació a la
organizations
societat d'acollida. Fent una
call on
interpel·lació a la
our host
memòria
society
dominant.
to question the
Per
mainstream
això crec
memory
que
and
és important
narratives. That's why I believe it is important
que facin la història o que feiem la història i la memòria
Yeah,
en
as I said,
conjunt.
it is important to build memory and history all together. It is also important that we need a collective history, right? Based on the community where the voice of everyday life citizens is as important as the perspective of the academic, of the experts and researchers. It is important to include our experience and our struggles to break this paradigm of who tells what and how. The methodology and the format has to be chosen by us all, by the groups that are struggling, that are carrying out activism, that are contributing to drafting and reshaping history. I would like to share with you an example, which is the one that we are putting together as the group of migrant women, care workers in Catalonia and in the rest of Spain, as a nation state, right? My colleagues are top, my Madrid colleagues are top, and they are building history through songs and podcasts, claiming the struggles of migrant women and care workers. It is important also to place the focus on today's migration logics and patterns. It's been now around 20 years that we are experiencing this migration pattern that prioritizes women to import care workers into Western countries. And this idea is oftentimes silenced. We are contributing to the economy, an economy that the system wants to be a black economy, right? And formal economy, because of course we live in a macho and patriarchal system, a racist system, which is not interested by women, and even less so if we look migrants. The system has never liked migrant women not even from other parts of Spain. Now it's even less the case. I mean, now that we come from the other side of the Atlantic, it's even worse. So then, right, in 1985, the first bill on housekeepers was approved, and the bill was reinterpreted in 2011. We would like to know what happened before, right, with those women that were neglected by the system. My aim here is to place the focus on the invisibilization of the care economy, the economy led by women, by migrant women, that we've come all the way from the other side of the Atlantic by crossing the Atlantic before
seguimos engrosando las estadísticas de las cadenas globales de los cuidados y seguimos engrosando las estadísticas de la economía sumergida. Por eso es que hago un llamamiento a los colectivos de personas migrantes y también a la lucha feminista para que luchen con nosotras las mujeres migrantes
all feminists to work hand in hand with us, migrant women, to claim for our rights also, the right to unemployment benefits, the right to enjoy all social security benefits, the right for our work to recognized, for our rest to be respected, holidays, etc. Because we are oftentimes neglected as women, taking care of others, both at home or in elderly centers and day centers. Even though I would like to make a clear difference here, it's not the same to work in-house and working in institutions. When we work in-house, we are even less protected than if we work in a public institution. Now, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's more clear than ever that there is an important lack of care for those who are participating in the care economy. So we need to place the focus, we need to lay on the table all these topics, we need to open a discussion about what is it that we want to build, what society do we want for us, for our children, for our grandchildren. Are we going to focus only on capital, on benefit, on trading people from one side to the other of the world without providing them with human rights? So this is what my presentation is about. Colonialism is here. Colonialism is happening here in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, but also here. We're being colonized, we're being slaved. It's some sort of migration bill that imposes us horrible work, 40 hours a week, at least a week, in order to be considered legal citizens, or a welcoming bill that imposes us a long list of documents and studies which are impossible to complete, especially for those who are working immense hours, endless hours. They cannot study.
Como el derecho a reagrupar la familia. Si tenemos una situación
tan crítica
como la que estamos viviendo y que casi nadie consigue un trabajo de 40 horas a la semana y una nómina de más de 1.200 euros, ¿cómo podemos poner eso y encima tener en nuestra propiedad un contrato de alquiler? Para poder reagrupar a nuestras familias, es que la ley es totalmente descarada. No podemos reagrupar nunca ni a nuestras parejas ni a nuestros hijos. Entonces, por eso seguimos teniendo el colonialismo dentro de nosotros a través de aquí. Con una ley de extranjería que es machista y racista, y que nos sigue poniendo la soga al cuello con tantos requisitos. Asimismo, estamos colonizados cuando creemos, o ciertas personas creen que venimos a quitarles el trabajo a las personas de la sociedad acogida. Cuando creen que recordamos la sanidad pública. Es decir, todos estos estereotipos contra las personas migrantes significa que hay un sistema encima colonialista que está haciendo de las suyas para que una persona pueda pensar así. Que engrosamos somos los que estamos en las
and we are the ones
las salas de esperas de los hospitales,
in the waiting rooms
of
the hospitals, and they see how under the pandemic we can also see
en los hospitales,
who are in
también el hecho de tener estereotipos de origen, por ejemplo, las latinoamericanas se nos da muy bien el cuidado a personas mayores, en las Filipinas el cuidado de los niños y la limpieza, también las marroquinas para la limpieza o el trabajo de la recogida de las frutas, africanas o africanos para el trabajo del campo
or people of African origin for working in the fields, and also where there is a lot of strength needed. So we have some colonialist ideas and we swim in them. And also when, for example, there are several studies on feminism and migration, there is always an ethnocentric Western perspective within social sciences, and also when there is a patronizing attitude with people coming from other countries. People believe that we are alone according to a specific sector. So it's interesting to see how we are told that we still work from the autochthonous population, but they see us as cheap labor in underground economy. Well, in summary, what we are requesting and what we are proposing is for these cleaning ladies to be listened, and also the group of migrants, because we are the ones who are interested in this solution. This cannot be solved without us. And we, as workers of domestic tasks, we have to think about ourselves, and this is why the self-organization of the different groups of many migrants who work at home, and it's crucial, and we are often underrepresented, and we are trying to make evident the capacity of proposals of domestic workers and the range for maneuver that we have. So we are trying to break some stereotypes of origin and some other ideas that come to mind in people when they're hiring us. There are many people who have university studies and at least studies of higher education, but they believe we are tabula rasa, and this is also having a colonized mindset. In summary, what we are requesting is to rebuild the memory altogether, the memory with the people in the street, with the activists, with the workers, with the workers, but not from the sphere of power, not from outside. And we can fight for these historical objects. And I'm asking, and we are always asking for the autochthonous population to be next to us, to be together of this process. And we don't want this voice to be lended. We don't need anybody to save us. We need people to be next to us in a process of recognition of rights. And I think that the welcoming society has forgotten that we are people, and also that proposals. And this is why we are not just asking for parity, we are asking for solidarity, although solidarity has also some nuances as charity, and we can prove and we can show that we can provide for mutual support, and we can recognize the effort that we are all making. And this is why we are asking for the decolonization of schools and the colonization of bodies, mindsets, studies, activism, and we want to decolonize the citizen participation, the academia, in benefit of a collective project. And this is why from United Women, which is the collective of different women participating in care, we are building narratives, memories, the memory of generations of different workers, and not only as women coming from other points of the world, but also from colleagues working in the Spanish state as a contribution to society and also a contribution to the economy, to the economy of care.
Hemos de hacer redes de
We should
apoyo
build
mutuo, de
networks of
sostenimiento de
support,
la vida,
mutual
de
networks of support,
aprendizaje, de
supporting life,
reconocimiento de la
learning,
resiliencia
recognizing the
de
resilience,
las mujeres que construimos
and
Cataluña
also
y el
the
resto del Estado español.
people
Hemos de hacer un
of the
reconocimiento de
Spanish
estas
state. We
luchas
have to
y por eso,
recognize all this, and this is why,
además de ser activistas y
besides being
usuarios
activists
y usuarias y
and
usuarios de
users
servicios,
of the
somos
service,
compañeras
we
y
are also
acompañantes.
mates,
Por
colleagues.
eso queremos romper la
And this is
barrera
why we want
de
to
quién
break
atiende
the
a quién
barrier
y
on
cómo lo
of
hacemos.
who is paying attention to who and
Gracias.
the way we do it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Norma, for your interesting contribution. As we have already said, it's like a mirror of this racism of our society on which we want to reflect and we want to see, as you have said, this racism and these relations which are a proof of this colonial heritage, which in the end are the base of our productive system. And of course, we have organized ourselves around these racial hierarchies of gender and class. Having said that, I would like to thank the three speakers for their interventions. If we could please turn on the camera and we will go to the Q&A. I have a question about the two conferences. I was not aware of the fact that one was still pending decolonization. Alberto has pointed to the Sahara question. I understand that these are very different processes, but I would like to emphasize on the question of taking on responsibilities by the Spanish state, and also how can we force the state to solve these questions? What are the competences of the state to solve these questions? I don't know if Alberto would like to start. We say that the Committee of Decolonization of the UN has been saying that Spain has to take on its task and responsibility and to participate in the resolution of the conflict, which is affecting territory which de facto continues to be a colony. And at the same time, we have also remembered the Spanish, Catalan, Basque, Andalusian, and the Canary Islands civil society. For years, they have been talking about the different paradoxes, political and international, which they are presenting in this territory, pending of decolonization. And we demand the central government and the autonomous government some type of clear political stance. So far, beyond the autonomic position in favor of decolonization, the central government has always denied the existence of this problem, whether we are talking about the conservative government or a progressive government. And I think that if the UN is not able to achieve like a change of policy by the metropolis, if the civil society and the old metropolis is not able to do it, the only possible conclusion is that unless the UN and France can do it, and these are the other powers that have an influence on the territory, it's very difficult to imagine that someone can do it. Thank you very much, Alberto. Verónica. Well, yes. Let me just tell you that in the case of one, it's pending the decolonization of the US. And I think that it's 1946 as the beginning of this domination. And this means that we don't see a very bright future because of the interest that the US has in Guam, which is a precursor of all the defense system. Now they have two naval bases there, which are occupying part of the territory, and to do without these possessions, in their opinion, is not part of their plans. In the island, we have very diverse movements by the local population, and they provide support to the present situation, and also some of them refuse the situation. Some others are looking for intermediate stances, such as maintaining the privileges, which in the point of view they contribute to because they are related to the US, and therefore, I don't know, I don't see that the situation can change in the near future. That's my perception, at least after having been in contact recently with the local population in the island. Thank you very much. I have several questions which are rich in the chat. One is for Norma. They're asking me if you think that the current approach on the colonial memories is a question that is focused much in the past and it's not affecting present situations.
Crec que la memòria
I
es
think
construeix
that the memory is built
cap al passat sempre.
towards the past, always.
I ha de centrar-se també
It
en
has
el
to
que
be
estem
centered
fent els
also
col·lectius i
in what the different groups and
activistes
collectives of
i les
activists are
persones
doing,
de peu
and
per
also the people
construir aquesta
in the street in order
història, no?
to build this part of history.
Per això deia
And
que
this is why
és
I was
important
saying
que
that it's very important that
es prengui nota
people
del que estem fent
remember
tothom.
and are aware of
Depèn
what we
del
are
que
all doing.
interessi, no?
Well, it
I
depends
també
on
té una
everybody's
mirada
interest. And of
sempre
course, to
cap a un
have a
sector
perspective towards
majoritari.
a
No
non-majority sector, a
interesamos las
minority
trabajadoras del
sector.
hogar, por
Maybe
decirlo
we're
así.
not
No somos un
interested in
objetivo
domestic
sexy
workers. We are not a sexy objective
para construir
for
memòria ni hacer història.
building
Per
memories
això,
or making
amb les
histories and
treballadores i amb les
narrations. And
meves
this is why
companyes
with the
sempre dic
workers and with my
que
colleagues,
necessitem
we have to
construir
say
nosaltres
that we need to build
l'objecte
the
històric
object,
que hem
the
de
historical
deixar per
object
la
that we want to
posteritat.
leave for future
I
generations.
sempre es compta des
And we
del passat.
always talk about the past, only about the past. I completely agree with you. Thank you, Norma. There is a question in the chat. I don't know if Alberto, you've been able to read it. And it's a public question. It's a bit long. Let me read it. Talking about the patrimonial value of colonial memories at home as a proof of neoliberal activity, for example, the Fair of Indians, how can we reverse this trend without eliminating these activities? That is to say, what are the tools of the cultural promotion agents in order to make these events something more inclusive, open, and critical? Thank you. That's a difficult question to answer. What we have to do, first of all, is to abandon the discourse reproducing this type of activities, and this demands a couple of things. First, trying to incorporate and to reformulate the activities so the other one can also welcome a more critical perspective on the colonial experience and the properties and the tragedies which were the consequence of this when we start a completely abstract and self-compliant discourse on the celebration of cultural diversity in itself, and also the multicultural discourse, multiculti that we know very well in Barcelona. And we don't leave room to a critical discourse and to these activities that highlight the conflict and the tragedies that have come together with this cultural context. So in summary, very clearly, we have to abandon this discourse, and we don't want just to have the abstract perspective of the university to reformulate the activities in order to have a critical discourse. I have another question, and this is for Verónica, and I have another one. I'm going to ask both of them. The first one, you have said that local people participate in research campaigns. I would like to know if these local people are chamorros or what is their identity, and in what way this participation happens in their projects of research. And on the other hand, I have another question, if there is any social contestation in the imaginary colonial memory in the Marianas. whether there is a contrary response. Well, thank you very much for all your questions. And related to the participation of the local community, yes, the local community is made by the Chamorros, and their participation it's primary. That's very important in the sense that all the wish to try to recover this memory that was being lost. And it was not our initiative, but they had this need to highlight this patrimony for different reasons. And it was ruined. And also the participation in the different campaigns, it's on a day-to-day basis. The members of the community that wish to participate in the activities of archaeology, they come every day, and we are excavating hand in hand. And the truth is that this is an experience which is very interesting for the whole team, and it's fundamental in order to contribute to introduce a different perspective. There are some links which are created, and these links happen in a different way. You break this obstacle that I was feeling before going to WAM. I was just reading the literature, the written one, the one I referred to, from a triumphalist perspective, exalting imperialism, and my perception of the islands was completely different. Of course, I was not hyper-mediatized by this, but I didn't have this link that has been built from working together with them and also having a shared objective. In this sense of the participation, which is 50-50. And in fact, the project is coordinated by the Pompeu Fabra institution, university, but also the Marianas institutions of Guam, the University of Guam, and the University of Hawaii, which is a joint project. And there are many groups participating in this same common objective. And the other question, yes, the monuments. The responses are ambivalent. It's also like the link with the US and the current political situation. There are some populations that have already incorporated these monuments to their imaginary. And in fact, one day they celebrate the day of the discovery, and they celebrate this first contact between the Magallanes and also those Chamorros living there. Sectors of the population refuse it, the most activist ones, and also the different sectors that don't want to be related to this heritage memory. And other sectors have incorporated this, and they don't see any conflict, such as Catholics, and they also accept these figures. San Vitoris, the Jesuits who created the mission, Magallanes, and in general, sometimes, often, when they are in the island, they heard that we were coming from Spain, and the perception from many people was of interest, and they knew more refusal. There are many attitudes, but there is a lot of ambivalence. People who want to incorporate this and people who refuse it directly, especially in more activist sectors. Well, thank you very much, Verónica. The second question is related to these celebrations and symbols, and the question is for Norma. And these are two questions, Norma. The first question is, how do you build memory within the migrant groups from activism? What actions do they take place? And how do you live from these collectives, celebrations such as the 12th of October?
Bueno, contesto la del 12 de octubre.
I will first answer the one of the 12th of October
con algo muy,
with something
muy significativo
which is
para
very
mí,
significtive
yo estuve
for me.
el primer 12 de octubre
When I
aquí,
was my first 12th of October
en
here in
llevo apenas
Catalonia,
8 años en Cataluña,
I've been here for
y,
8
bueno,
years
en
only
España.
in Spain.
fue muy curioso
It was very interesting
cómo darme cuenta de que
to
en mi
realize
país o en
that my
Latinoamérica el 12
country,
de
or at
octubre,
least in Latin America, the
según
12th
en
of October,
qué
depending
lugares se
on
festeja
what
como
place, is
algo
celebrated as
reivindicativo contra
something
la
of
colonización.
claim
Y
against the
en otros
colonizing
sectores se
movement. And in other
festeja como
sectors,
nos han
they
conquistado.
celebrated as that we
Entonces
have
me
been conquered.
encantó ver
So I was very pleased
al
to see
compartir el primer
and to
12 de
share
octubre
the
con el
first 12th of October
colectivo donde yo
with the
estaba,
collective of
porque
migrants where I was living,
es que nos habéis
because
jodido la vida, más
they
o
say you
menos.
fuck us, more or less,
Contra la
against
dominación, contra el
the domination,
colonialismo,
colonialism, and
contra el
also
despojo,
against
contra el saqueo,
the
etc. Entonces fue muy
scavenging
significativo
that had
darme
happened
cuenta
there. So
de
it was very
cómo
significant to realize
aquí
that
se
here
vivía
we were going
una
through and
realidad
we were living a
como
specific
en mi
reality.
país,
And in my
según en qué
country,
sectores de mi país, porque algunos eran
in some
como
sectors of my country
muy
at least,
colonializados
many
y
were very much
agradeciendo la
colonialized,
colonización.
and they
Es
were
decir,
thanking for
América
these colonial
Latina
powers.
todavía
Latin
tiene
America
esto
still
de
has
agradecer la colonia,
a
agradecer la
tendency to thank
colonización. Pero
for the
también hay
colony
otros
and the
sectores que están en
colonizing
contra
power.
de la
But there are
colonización, ¿no?
other sectors who are
De todos los
against
despojos
the
y de las
colonialist
tierras, sobre todo, y
process
de las mujeres,
because
los
of
abusos,
all the
etcétera.
lands
Y
abuses in
respondo
women,
la primera
etc. And let
pregunta
me answer also the first
de
question
cómo se hace memoria
of
con el
how
activismo, pues
we
formando parte del activismo.
celebrate these memories of
Creo
activism
que
by
es
belonging
importante que,
to these
como
groups.
decía,
I think that it's important
que
that as
las feministas y todo el que
we
se
were saying
considere
before, feminist,
feminista
and
acompaña
everyone who
las
considers
luchas
himself or herself
de otras
feminist,
mujeres que hemos
fights together
cruzado
with other women who have
mares, océanos, etcétera,
crossed seas and
para
oceans
construir
in order to
esta
build
historia.
this
Entonces,
history.
lo que pedimos es un
So what we
acompañamiento
are
a nuestro
requesting
activismo.
is to work together with our activism. Thank you very much, Norma. I have a question for Alberto. I don't know if anybody would like to add anything to these questions. Any reflection, any comment? For Alberto, what should the public administrations do with the monuments in the street that live episodes or protagonists of colonialism and this law of official secret? How does it affect the Spanish colonies? I think that to the first question, all of you could answer. Well, both questions are very pertinent, especially the second one that could give way to long reflection, and maybe Celeste could also contribute because she knows very much of this colonial, and Verónica for sure. What about the first one, the first question? Let me just mention something, and Norma and Verónica can contribute to my comments. Well, first of all, let me tell you that to generate a space of discourse and negotiation with the citizenship in order to see if, especially those which are more flagrant, such as streets and plazas and nomenclature, maybe could be revisited and reformulated and changed also occasionally, and not to do it from top down, a decision taken by the political elites, because then it will be almost impossible. It's slower and it generates a bigger level of conflict for the negotiation. I think it's indispensable in order to have a minimum agreement, if possible, on different names, and to mention that it's the offense, the use, and the indifference of the others. And as far as the archives, well, Spain, in this sense, is probably one of the European countries which has a regime of colonial archives, civil and military, of difficult access and of bigger opacity and arbitrariety. And although there have been some recent initiatives of trying to change this opacity, in practice, everything has its own tradition and inertia, and allowing, for example, access of documents which are duplicated in another archive and on the contrary, prohibiting the access to some archives and documents which allow another access. So the researcher has a feeling of complete arbitrarity, of discretionality by the institutions of these archives. And what we are requesting is an effort of coordination and facilitating the access and reproduction. The question of reproduction is very important because, for example, I have been working in different archives, civil and military, with a certain frequency, and almost all of them allow us to take a picture of these documents if we are under the critical perspective of archivers and if they're accessible. And it allows us to introduce the digital camera there, which is not very common here because it dificults the research and having to go through these services of reprography of the archive, the cleaning process. The process is more difficult. There are many obstacles, but well, this is the archives that we have. I don't want to dwell on this because the experience I have with the archives and colonial documentation is not the best, but the reflection on the fact that it doesn't only affect research. I have often found in the archive of administration migrant people who come from workers of the colonial administration or because of the decolonization are apatrid, that they cannot access their documentation to claim their passive rights in front of the administration. And this is unacceptable. Not long ago, a guide was made to help Saharawis to have documentation in order to claim their nationality. And I think that besides this pillar, which is affecting migrants and people coming from colonized peoples, it's also an important axis to reflect. I think Norma wants to say something. Or Verónica? Now.
Y hay una pregunta al
There is
chat.
a question also to me.
Pardon.
A question from Norma. In what way intellectuals and academics can collaborate with their fights and processes of construction of migrant memories? Are you interested in this collaboration, or are you more critical as far as the role of intellectuals? Thank you very much, Norma, for your work and activism.
És molt interessant aquesta pregunta.
That's a very interesting question.
Crec que
because I think
les companyes cada vegada més són més
colleagues
sensibles a
are more and more
ven
sensible
a demanar la seva
to who
experiència
is
o a preguntar
experience
coses
or
sobre
asking
les
things
reivindicacions i
about the
tal,
claims,
perquè
because
hi ha molt de morbo según la
people
situació.
are not very clear
I
and they act
depèn de
depending on the
la
situation and
inclinació
also
a vegades
depending
política
on
que
the
tenen
political
la
perspective
persona
of the
que
person
vol
who
tenir una
is
investigació, una
carrying
recerca o
out
algun
specific
treball
research
intel·lectual o
or
acadèmic,
some
com diu la
intellectual
candidata.
work.
Crec que
I
per
think
això
that
som
for
una mica
this,
més crítiques
we are a little bit
aquí
more critical here
de qui ve a
and
fer
who
el treball de
is
recerca.
coming to do some research work. But I think
Creo que es súper importante
it's very important
que estas luchas
that
reivindicativas y
these
los procesos de construcción
fights
de
and these
memoria
processes of
de las personas
building
migrantes se hagan en
memories
conjunto.
of
Creo que
migrant
nosotras
people
tenemos que
can
construir
happen.
una
I think that
memoria
we have to
y
build
aportar
a
a la historia y
memory
tal,
and
pero creo
contribute to
que
history, but I also
desde los
think
intelectuales y
that
académicos,
from
como ha
the
dicho ella,
intellectuals, as she's saying,
también tienen que
we also have
participar de
to
estos
see
procesos,
the
pero
participation of them in these
acompañando el
processes,
proceso.
but
Yo creo que
together
no
with
es
these
de
processes. I think that we should not
absorber
absorb
la experiencia
the
o la
experience
situación y
and the
publicar
situation and
el
to
producto histórico que
publish
quieran,
the
un libro,
historical
una revista, un
project,
artículo, lo
whatever
que
it is,
sea,
a book, a
sino más
magazine, an
bien
article,
intervenir y
but to
participar en el
intervene
proceso
and to
de
participate in
construcción
the
de
process
esto.
of construction.
Pero eso lleva tiempo,
But that
entonces
takes time.
es lo que cuesta.
So this is what's difficult. Excuse me. My microphone was off. Well, I don't have any more questions, and it's time to close this roundtable. I would like to thank all the speakers for their participation and the care they have had with the tempos, and also for answering the question. It's been a pleasure to listen to all of you. Thank you very much once again, and to the rest of people present. Let me remind you that we will be back at 6:45. Don't disconnect the session, and please stay here with the camera and the microphones off. Thank you.